Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlights series. We're going to be focusing on benchmark 1.11, defining the rule of law and recognizing its influence on the development of legal, political, and governmental systems in the United States. In Part 2, we will analyze the meaning and importance of due process in the United States legal system and the impact of the rule of law on government officials. We're going to analyze the meaning and importance of due process in the U.S. legal system. We're going to evaluate the impact of the rule of law on government officials and institutions, focusing on accountability to the law, consistent application and enforcement of the law, decisions based on the law, fair procedures, and the transparency of institutions. So what is the meaning and importance of due process in the U.S. legal system, and what is the impact of the rule of law on government officials? First, we look at procedures that are required to achieve due process. First, an unbiased court. Very important for there to be an unbiased court to achieve due process. There needs to be a notice of the proposed action and the grounds asserted, which means claimed, for that notice. For example, if a person is going to be prosecuted for committing a crime, they need to be notified as to what they are being held accountable for. What is the crime that they are accused of committing? And when they are in court to be, for that process to unfold, that court must be unbiased. A little known piece of trivia about the symbol of an unbiased court. We often think of Lady Justice, that justice is blind. But interesting is that judges also wear black robes. And one of the reasons that they wear black robes is to demonstrate that they are not biased, that they are not favoring their own point of view. So they're quite literally covering themselves up to demonstrate that it's not their point of view that they're going to be focusing on when they are considering whether or not someone might be guilty of a crime, or they're interpreting the meaning of the Constitution, but instead they're focusing on the rule of law when they are making those deliberations. And that means that there's they themselves do not take part in terms of their own thoughts and feelings. It's the law that is the important element. Let's continue. The opportunity to present reasons why the proposed action should not be taken. The right to present evidence, call witnesses, cross-examine witnesses, and no opposing evidence. So people have the right to know, if they're being prosecuted, what evidence has been found that could be used against them. There also has to be an opportunity to present reasons why the proposed action should not be taken. For example, sometimes we find in the area of juvenile law that even though a young person may have committed a crime, their attorney may give reasons why that young person should not be sent to prison, and therefore an alternative sentencing is more appropriate because of the age of the person who committed the crime. Let's continue. A decision based exclusively on the evidence presented, right? That in order to accomplish due process in a legal system, a decision must be based exclusively on the evidence presented. Many of you know that part of the jury system is jury selection. And oftentimes what happens in jury selection is that jurors are going to be questioned about their points of view about particular issues. There's a Latin phrase for this process called voir dire, V-O-I-R-D-I-R-E, voir dire. And that means that people who have been called up for jury duty, they still need to be asked, what is your position? Should a person be sent to prison for committing a particular type of crime? Is there a minimum sentence that you would want somebody who's convicted of a particular crime to be given? So if those folks who are being interviewed have an opinion, they're likely going to be excluded from the jury, because that suggests that their decision is not going to be based exclusively, solely on the evidence presented, but it might be based on their personal opinions about something that they learned about the witness on the news. And that is something that Judge Friendly says, who's the author of this list, says is a violation of the concept of due process in the United States legal system. What about the opportunity to be represented by counsel, represented by an attorney? Well, that is guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment. The right to representation is guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment, but that means that you can have someone represent your interests. But if the government is going to pay for that representation, a person must demonstrate that they cannot afford an attorney. And that's an interpretation of the Sixth Amendment that we find in Gideon versus Wainwright, a U.S. Supreme Court decision from 1963. There's also a requirement that the court or the tribunal prepare a record of the evidence presented and prepare written findings of fact and reasons for its decision. One of the most fascinating things that you can do, if you have time, is to read judges' decision making. A jury doesn't have to give its reasons when it's determining guilt or not guilt. But what we find is that most judicial decisions, there is a ruling in writing that explains, this is the reason that I ruled this way. Or when we come to a court, the U.S. Supreme Court, their decisions are published online. District courts, appeals courts. You can read the reasons. You can read the reasons as to why the findings of fact resulted in a particular decision. So what is the impact of the rule of law on government officials? Well, when we're talking about accountability, that means that processes, norms, and structures hold public officials legally responsible for their actions. Just because a person is a public official doesn't mean that they don't have to abide by the law. It is not common, but it certainly happens that someone is found to have violated campaign finance law when they were running for office, and thus, as a consequence, they end up leaving office. And sometimes that means that they might not be able to hold a public office again, depending on the crime that they might commit. So public officials are held responsible for their actions. They are not immune from that. Fair procedures or due process. This means that decisions are made based on established and known rules. That means that the person needs to know what a crime is, and they also need to know what the rules are for being prosecuted for that crime. Then we have decisions based on law. A person accused of a crime has the right to be informed about the accusations against them and to be shown the evidence proving those allegations. A person who is accused of a crime because somebody says, well, I think they did it, or their personality suggests to me that they're a criminal, so let's hold them accountable. It doesn't work that way. Not only does the person accused of a crime have to be told what the accusations against them are, but they also have to be shown the evidence against them. So oftentimes in jury trials, we will see that the prosecution will introduce evidence, and the defendant must be there to see that evidence that's being presented against them. A consistent application of the law. Each person should be treated in the same way by the legal system, no matter who they are. And so what this means is that a person needs to be treated the same way, even if perhaps they might use foul language. They might be, show bad behavior during various processes, but they must be treated the same. Enforcement of the law. The state must effectively prevent crime and violence of every sort by enforcing the laws. Right? One of the key ways to deter people from committing crimes is to know that they will be enforced, and therefore a person who commits a crime should be pretty confident that they're going to get caught. And maybe if they continue committing those crimes because they didn't get caught, eventually they'll probably get caught. And so one way that the state can prevent crimes is by enforcing them. And then finally, the transparency of institutions. The legal system is seen and understood by the public. So that means that people can learn about the legal system, how it operates, and what that means and how that impacts their lives. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? Please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.